All right, everybody. Firstly, welcome back to the channel. This is a really cool series, and it's one of my favorite topics because I still think it's the most important thing that we can do, both as players and coaches, to help make you better at playing the game, and that's going to be managing low point. So last time what we went into is we used a yoga wedge, and we used the right shoulder for how to help us project getting the low point more forward. Now, I think there's still more to it than that, and we're going to cover some different areas, some different dimensions. And today, one of them is we're going to actually cover why players' low points actually move back and making sure that we're not doing something to just try and change a ball flight pattern that is going to affect the low point, such as club path or swinging out to the right. So I know just about everybody on this channel, or anybody that's watching content on YouTube, one of our biggest issues is slicing the golf ball. Okay, so one of the reasons right here why players actually slice a golf ball is probably due in part to having either too much pressure back, because the more my pressure is back, you can see how I can hit the ground behind the golf ball. That would be low point back, okay? So what we end up choosing as a direction is we choose to get the low point moving more in, which you can see from down the line, you can see more out to in, so that we can move that divot more forward, because a lot of times our pressure is too far back. So if we don't fix the right area first, and I'm this player that has an out-in movement, but my pressure is back right here, and I start working on more of a swing direction, getting it out to the right, or getting my club path moving out to the right, that's going to shift my low point further back. So it would be the wrong area to work on, or it would be the wrong order for us to actually try and attack that issue in. So we always want to make sure, number one, the most important fundamental skill in golf is contact. Making sure that we can land the golf club on the ball and creating a divot next. That, I would say, is fundamental skill number one. Apart from hitting a driver off a tee, it's okay to have it back. So when we look at this, I think what we see is we've all been told that we need to swing the golf club in to out to the right, which I'm not going to disagree with that. I think we can obviously create more speed, more angular momentum coming from the inside where the arms are supported by the body. And we can also add more rotation, which is another piece that's going to help us to create more speed. So I think there's a way that we can actually do both of these. And this would be kind of a tutorial that I would use to build on what we did last time with the right shoulder. And we're now going to start to move it more into the pelvis. So what we'll see right in here is if I swing the golf club back to shaft parallel to the ground, so from the down the line view now, what you'll see is if my right hip continues to move forward, you can see that club head is going to be staying more behind me. That's going to create also more of an in to out direction. But the more in to out this golf club moves, the easier it is to move the low point back. So we need to make sure that if we have an outward driver of low point, we need to have a forward driver of low point as well to offset that. So for the player that's out to in, we're not going to fix the path first. We're going to get the low point forward first. And I'm going to show you a way that's really helpful that we can use the pelvis and the hips and where we want to get those two at impact, so that we have a better chance of both controlling the low point being forward and also controlling the directional movement of the golf club. So we'll get right into this. All right, so the first piece that I'm going to show you right here is I'm going to put an alignment stick here, which you can see through my belt loop, so that we can relate this to the hips. So a lot of times what I see out of players, just due in part, a lot of us want to rotate and a lot of us want to get open. And I don't disagree with it, but I think there's a parameter that we need to make sure that's happening. So a lot of times when I see a player in here and they start to rotate the hip, what you'll see is when we start to rotate the hips, you see how this stick right here is actually staying backwards. So if I rotate like this to where my lead side starts moving back and my pressure starts to shift, not only is that going to change my swing direction from out to in, but it's going to start to move my pressure backwards. So we need to be moving this forward and rotationally the right way. So the first thing that I would do is I'd put an alignment stick here through my belt loops, and you'll see I've got another alignment stick here running through about the center of my feet. So this is going to be our drill and how we're going to get it forward, and we're also going to get it outwards. So the first thing I'm going to do is up against a solid left leg is I'm going to move my right hip closer to the center of my feet while my head stays centered. So you can see how I'm moving this right hip closer to the center of my feet. Now what you'll see out of this, as I start to move the right hip in and I keep it forward, this is starting to project a little bit of rotation. So this is not just a straight linear movement, it's also an inward movement. So I'm taking this right hip, moving it closer to the center of my feet, and a lot of times this is going to start to open up a little bit more naturally, assuming that we have a pretty solid pressure here in our left leg. So the very first piece that I'm going to have you do right here is we're going to go set up, we're going to feel impact, and we're going to create where our destination is going to be. So I'm going to go set up right here, right hip towards the center of my feet. You can see how the leg is not flexing towards the ball. Right hip towards the center of my feet. And now from here, keeping the head on center, I'm going to go into a 90-90-90 arm straight finish. So I'm going to go 90-90-90 arm straight. So that would mean that my chest, my torso, and my hips are pointed at the target, and my arms are straight with the head on center. So that's going to be the very first thing that I'm going to learn how to do. I'm going to go right hip forward, 90-90-90, arms straight. And that's going to be the very first place, because the right hip getting forward gives us a much better chance of landing a divot here in front of the golf ball. And this horizontal piece as well, our linear movement, is going to help us to keep that golf club traveling a little bit more from the inside if we're used to being an out to in player. So the first place that I would start is number one. Let's make sure that we can do something that's going to help us to move the low point forward. Number two, we're also going to do something that is going to help us to manage the inward path, because you can see if I change my hips right here and I start to rotate with pressure backwards, you can see how that would influence the direction that the arms and the shaft are going to want to swing, and they're going to want to be more out to in, and that's just so that we can move the low point forward enough in the wrong manner. Okay? That's what produces pulls, slices, etc. So our first shot that we're going to hit is we're going to go set up. Right hip towards the center of the feet. The head's going to stay on center. 90-90-90, arm straight. And I can even hit a little shot like that. And this would be the first place that I would start until I can perform this correctly every time. I'm going to preset my hips forward. I'm going to swing the arms back to about halfway and go 90-90-90, arm straight. And so we can see that golf ball, I had a divot in front, the ball started right, and it also drew. That's the very first skill that I would say when we need to go into a path change and our low point is, or our pressure is too far back to start. We need to make sure that we're addressing the pressure issue first, and then let's also use that pressure issue or that pressure change to help us influence the inward to the outward movement of the golf club right there. So that would be the very first place that I would start. So I'd go in here again, set up, right hip towards the center, 90-90-90, arm straight. I'm going to do this with a half shot. So you can see I'm presetting impact, swing it back. 90-90-90, and there's another start right draw. So take these pieces right here and do them in levels. The way that I would ask you to do this from a practice plan standpoint, if I was teaching you, is I would say, make sure you can perform this 5 times in a row at a half swing. Once we can perform that 5 times in a row, then we'll take it to a 3/4 swing. Then we would start to bring it back to a normal setup, filling right hip forward, 90-90-90, arm straight. So I'll do a normal one. So I've got my normal setup. I'm going to feel right hip forward, 90-90-90, arm straight. And we'll do this with a half one right here. and we'll let it go. So if you really pay attention to my right hip, I'm going to be here. And so there's another start right draw that I have landed a divot well in front. Take this in phases, take this in pieces right here so that we have the ability to do it correct, to make sure that we're managing. Number one, we're not going to affect the low point moving back. We're going to keep it forward, and we can now start to move the pelvis and the hips in a fashion that are going to help give us room for the arms to come down and also influence the low point to move more outward. That would be our golf swing in the direction that it's actually moving. Inside of that, we would then go half shots, pressure forward. Half shots with pressure forward, right hips on the line, 90-90 arms straight. Move that into a normal setup. Then we could even start doing this with 3/4 shots right here. There's my feel, right hips forward, 90-90-90. Take it back to a neutral setup. I'm going to go 3/4 of the way back and create that same feel. And so that right there is another start right draw that I've landed the divot in front and I've hit that really solid. So take these pieces in phases, make sure we're working on the right variables, and make sure that those variables are always helping to influence contact. Make sure they're always influencing the contact before we start to go into the path stuff. We'll go deeper into this later on inside of this series where we're working on low points. So if you guys have any questions whatsoever, leave those in the comments down below. I appreciate you watching. Thanks for your support, and we'll see you next time. I hope you enjoyed this video here. If you haven't, please click that subscribe button. You can also click the bell right there, and that's going to notify you every time that I release a new YouTube video. Also, if you haven't, check out that last video that I did. It's right here, pinned to the screen. Thank you so much for your support. I really do appreciate you watching. If you have any questions, any comments, please leave those below, and I will make sure I get back to each and every one of you. So, thank you again. Appreciate your support. We'll see you next time.